Why do we hate?
We hate because we're taught to hate. We hate because we're ignorant. We're the product of ignorant people who have been taught an ignorant thing, which is that there are 4 or 5 different races. There are not 4 or 5 different races. There's only one race on the face of the earth, and we're all members of that race, the human race. But we have separated people into races so that some of us can see ourselves as superior to the others. We thought it would work, I guess. It hasn't worked. It has been bad for everyone. But it's time to get over this business. There is no gene for racism. There's no gene for bigotry. You're not born a bigot. You have to learn to be a bigot. Anything you learn, you can unlearn. It's time to unlearn our bigotry. It's time to get over this thing, and we best get over it pretty soon. I'm an educator, and it is my business as an educator to lead people out of ignorance. The ignorance of thinking that you're better or worse than someone else because of the amount of a pigment in your skin. Pigmentation in your skin has nothing to do with intelligence or with your worth as a human being. It's time to get over that.
It's a proven fact that these forged documents existed and were being circulated amongst right-wing newspapers in Baghdad and around the world in the immediate aftermath of the fall of the Iraqi regime. Now, Senator, I gave my heart and soul to oppose the policy that you promoted. I gave my political life's blood to try to stop the mass killing of Iraqis by the sanctions on Iraq, which killed 1 million Iraqis, most of them children. Most of them died before they even knew that they were Iraqis, but they died for no other reason other than that they were Iraqis, with the misfortune to be born at that time. I gave my heart and soul to stop you committing the disaster that you did commit in invading Iraq. And I told the world that your case for the war was a pack of lies. I told the world that Iraq, contrary to your claims, did not have weapons of mass destruction. I told the world, contrary to your claims, that Iraq had no connection to Al-Qaeda. I told the world, contrary to your claims, that Iraq had no connection to the atrocity on 9/11/2001. I told the world, contrary to your claims, that the Iraqi people would resist a British and American invasion of their country, and that the fall of Baghdad would not be the beginning of the end, but merely the end of the beginning. Senator, in everything I said about Iraq, I turned out to be right, and you turned out to be wrong. And 100,000 people have paid with their lives. 1,600 of them American soldiers sent to their deaths on a pack of lies. 15,000 of them wounded, many of them disabled forever on a pack of lies. If the world had listened to Kofi Annan, whose dismissal you demanded, if the world had listened to President Chirac, who you want to paint as some kind of corrupt traitor, if the world had listened to me and the anti-war movement in Britain, we would not be in the disaster that we're in today. Senator, this is the mother of all smokescreens. You are trying to divert attention from the crimes that you supported, from the theft of billions of dollars of Iraq's wealth. Have a look at the real oil for food scandal. Have a look at the 14 months you were in charge of Baghdad, the first 14 months, when $8.8 billion of Iraq's wealth went missing on your watch. Have a look at Halliburton and the other American corporations that stole not only Iraq's money, but the money of the American taxpayer. Have a look at the oil that you didn't even meter, that you were shipping out of the country and selling, the proceeds of which went who knows where. Have a look at the $800 million you gave to American military commanders to hand out around the country without even counting it or weighing it. Have a look at the real scandal breaking in the newspapers today, revealed in the earlier testimony in this committee, that the biggest sanctions busters were not me or Russian politicians or French politicians. The real sanctions busters were your own companies with the connivance of your own government.
Aren't Arabs terrified? Aren't Iraqis terrified? Don't Arab and Iraqi women weep when their children die? Doesn't bombing strengthen their determination? War is an easy thing to talk about. There are not many people of the generation that remember it. The right honourable gentleman served with distinction in the last war. I never killed anyone, but I wore uniform. But I was in London in the Blitz in 1940, living in the Millbank Tower where I was born. Some different ideas have come in since. And every night I went down to the shelter in Thames House. Every morning I saw Dockland burning. 500 people were killed in Westminster one night by a landmine. It was terrifying. Aren't Arabs terrified? Aren't Iraqis terrified? Don't Arab and Iraqi women weep when their children die? Doesn't bombing strengthen their determination? What fools we are to live in a generation for which war is a computer game for our children and just an interesting little Channel 4 news item. Every member of Parliament tonight who votes for the government motion will be consciously and deliberately accepting the responsibility for the deaths of innocent people if the war begins, as I fear it will. Now, that's for their decision to take. But this is a quite unique debate in my parliamentary experience where we're asked to share responsibility for a decision we won't really be taking with consequences for people who have no part to play in the brutality of the regime which we are dealing with. And I finish with this. On October the 24th, 1945, and the former Prime Minister from Bexley Old Sidcup will remember it, the United Nations Charter was passed. And the words of that charter etched into my mind and move me even as I think of them. We, the people of the United Nations, determined to save future generations, succeeding generations, from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has caused untold suffering to mankind. That was the pledge of that generation to this generation, and it would be the greatest betrayal of all if we voted to abandon the Charter and take unilateral action and pretend we were doing it in the name of the international community. And I shall vote against the motion for the reasons that I've given the House.
We created ISIS. I mean, ISIS is no less than the people up in Islamberg, no less than Gulen, is a CIA creation. John McCain, for heaven's sake, was over there with the ISIS officials. We created them. They came from the al-Nusra group, the Syrian Liberation Front. These two organizations combined, and they morphed into ISIS. It's our creation. We create them. We still direct them. When ISIS warriors are injured in battle, where are they transported? They're transported, for heaven's sake, to Israel. They're treated by the Israelis in Israeli hospitals and brought back to battle.
Well, plenty of the rebels have acknowledged that they've been supported by Israel, and they've thanked Israel for helping them throughout. In fact, arms are oftentimes caught. Israeli arms are caught on en route to the rebel groups. But when it comes to this, then the grand scheme, the grand chessboard game. Yes. Obviously, we're seeing the neocon strategy. Wes Clark talked about it: destabilize and overthrow the governments of Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, Libya, Syria, Iran. Yeah. I mean, this was the strategy that he talked about over 15 years ago. Yes. And obviously, we've seen it come to fruition to a large extent. But what is the game is ultimately, is it just continuing to destabilize the sovereign regimes that oppose the will of the various financial oil conglomerates, or is it to create just total chaos in this entire region?
Well, the ultimate goal, of course, is money, wealth. You know, real wealth comes from natural resources. Our money is, just fabricated. It's not backed by anything. Mm-hmm. But real wealth comes from natural resources, be it gold, be it oil, be it heroin, which is the third most valuable commodity in the world right now. Another reason we're in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. But the end of the game is being played to be won. It's not a game that will go on ad infinitum. Mm-hmm. It's being played to win, so that at the end of the day, the money cartel from the United States primarily, it's really an Anglo-American establishment.
British and U.S.
Yes, but at the end of the day, they control the natural resources. Russia's dependent on it. So Russia, of course, if you're depriving it of natural resources, you're depleting all of its power. Mm-hmm. The same thing with China. So, no, the end of the game is total economic control of the world.
I've seen the results of the bombing of hospitals, of schools, of sewage treatment plants. It is appalling. And if you want to know what the people of Palestine, you say that you're speaking on behalf of the people of Palestine. If you want to know what the people of Palestine want, ask the Palestinian farmers.
We've seen the most desperate and brutal violations of people's right to protest against injustice, against occupation, against the taking of the very ground from under people.
Israel is an apartheid state. Any of us who've been there know that. Once you know that, it changes you.
Though these settlements are repeatedly condemned as illegal by the EU, UN and Irish government, they continue to extract valuable natural resources and agricultural produce. These goods are then exported and sold on shelves around the world, including in Ireland, to pay for occupation. There is a clear hypocrisy here. How can we condemn the settlements as illegal, as theft of land and resources, but then happily buy the proceeds of this crime? We must be clear on this. Israeli settlements in the West Bank are war crimes. This is what we're dealing with, and I'm amazed at how relaxed people can be about it, as if trading in the proceeds of war crimes is not a big deal. I witnessed with my own eyes the crushing indignity of a Palestinian community cut off from their water supply so that it could be diverted instead to support an Israeli chicken farm. That is horrendous, and the injustice of it will stay with me forever. That commercial settlement built on stolen land beyond international recognised borders is a war crime, and I know I'm repeating myself today. And I'm asking my colleagues across the House today, is the moral response to simply condemn this as illegal, but then ask how much for the eggs? Is there not a deep hypocrisy in that position? For a country that prides itself on upholding humanitarian principles and international law, this is unacceptable, and I believe it's time we stood clearly against this injustice.
We are doing commerce with people who are committing war crimes. And I believe that this bill from Senator Francis Black is where we get a chance to break the consensus that has utterly failed the Palestinian people.
The case for this bill has become even more compelling, if I may say so, because we've seen appalling atrocities, killing of Palestinian civilians.
I raised €55,000 to put in solar energy and water treatment plants, and I saw them being demolished, bombed by the Israelis. That's what happens.
There is something rotten in the way democracy is defined and lived, and most importantly, denied.
The relentless expansion of Israeli settlements on Palestinian territory is unjust, provocative and undermines the credibility of Israelis' commitment to a peaceful solution to a conflict to which we all want an end.
Nelson Mandela came to a joint sitting of these houses in the early 1990s, and he said what made the practical difference on behalf of the Irish people was definitive action from the people, was a boycott, was solidarity, and that can make the difference here.
The government of Benjamin Netanyahu has to get a message. And I believe the message has to be a very simple one, and that is respect.
We've seen the most desperate and brutal violations of people's right to protest against injustice, against occupation, against the taking of the very ground from under people.
I no longer require these medals. We are veterans for peace. I'm returning his medals also for our participation in previous attacks in the Middle East. We are here today in protest at the decision to bomb in Syria.
Innocent, vulnerable, sentient beings are being killed. Men, women and children. We cannot sow bloodshed and reap peace. I no longer require these medals.
I would much rather live my life not having to deal with the consequences of what if. That is why I throw these medals back. What if every soldier past and present did this?